Well, I think clearly there's some people doing that, running around made half crazy by their therapeutic junkie quest, just as there are some people who are utterly opposed to that way of looking at the world. But for the most part, people have so much coming at them by way of expertise, by way of advice, by way of ideas, by way of vocabularies, that they're really forced to pick and choose. They have to compartmentalize. They have to decide on this occasion to do this, and on that occasion to use some other excuse or explanation for their behavior. Moreover, I think people really face serious problems these days, problems of economic instability, of poverty in some cases. And they're really much more focused on solving the problems of everyday life in the most practical way they can, rather than being preoccupied with therapy. Well, I think that clearly the liberal critique of therapy, the therapeutic sensibility, as I like to call it, has always been essentially that it makes public issues into personal problems. However, I think if you were to look at those unionists who are still around and still active, they get angry when their jobs are taken away. And they may be offered therapy, but they take out their anger in political actions. When people get upset about the war in Iraq, as they are these days, they took out their dissatisfaction last week in the elections by turning out in significant numbers to vote and to vote the rascals out and to vote a new set of rascals in. Why do I feel this way? In part, is my reading of research. If you look at a number of books that sociologist Alan Wolf has written in recent years, you don't get the sense of people therapized. You don't get the sense of people absorbing therapeutic ideas. You get the sense of people solving problems, taking action. It is true that the networks that people have access to have probably shrunk. They've shrunk in part because of economic issues. There's a good recent piece of sociological research that suggests the average number of persons that a typical person has access to talk to about important issues has gone down by about 1 over the past 20 years. And it's a fairly reliable piece of research. What's happening is that people are turning more into their families and relying more on their families as replacements for perhaps a larger network. Well, I see less change, I think, than your question implies. The kind of contrasting views of people in this country, at least in the United States, as on the one hand capable of doing anything, manifest destiny, building the industrial society, social mobility, what have you. That idea, it's the historically dominant one, and I think it still is, basically, that enterprise is thriving. We're very much a market-oriented, market-driven society. There has always been an undercurrent of opposition to that. It's not new. It fluctuates from time to time, and we may be in a point right now where it's at its apex. But in the humanistic psychology movement back in the 1960s, or in the alternative communities of the 1960s, or go back to the 1840s in the burned-over district in New York State, where religious utopian communities were being tossed out right and left, the main surviving one being the Mormons. They have always had that oppositional thrust. And so you see fluctuation historically, up and down. It's the coming and going of the tides, if you will. Remember that if you think of environmentalism, there are different varieties of environmentalism. A lot of the environmentalism of the past 20, 30 years has been very oppositional. I mean, we would really all like to go out and be able to live in the wilderness somewhere and survive for ourselves. It's been a critique of advanced industrial society. What you're seeing among environmentalists now is a much more greater willingness to cooperate with industry, with corporations. We see it out west where I live, where environmentalists are coming to terms with protecting sheep on the one hand and protecting wolves on the other, and finding ways to balance those kinds of concerns. I think Americans are pragmatists. I think that they face life's problems. They tend to do it not by subscribing to absolute ideologies of one kind or another, and so they are over the map, if you will, in their attitudes and their values. They're out there trying to make a life, make a living, get things done, falling off the therapeutic wagon that they've sometimes climbed onto, as I say, sometimes getting religion, getting drunk, getting laid, and just in generally pursuing their liberties and their happiness.